Audio.
Good afternoon. Please stand by. The webinar will begin shortly. Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Creative Placemaking? On the Ground Impacts. My name is Shantaria Charleston, and I will be the host for today's call. If you've not already done so, please ensure that you have access to both the audio and video portion of the webinar. To access the PowerPoint for today's call, please follow the link on your meeting confirmation email. All participants are in listen-only mode, which means your line is muted. However, we are very interested in your questions and feedback, so to submit a question during today's webinar, please use the Q&A box that will appear on the lower right-hand side of your screen. Again, today's webinar is being recorded. So we have a variety of really great speakers today for the webinar, so I don't want to take up too much time on the HAC PSA, but I do want to give just a brief overview on the Housing Assistance Council. The Housing Assistance Council is a national nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C. that assists local organizations with building affordable homes in rural America. With the mission to improve housing conditions for the rural poor, HAC emphasizes local solutions, empowerment of the poor, reduced dependency, and self-help strategies. And so if you are interested in learning a little bit more about HAC's programs, the contact information for our regional offices are being displayed on the screen. Also, you can get this information via HAC's website, www.ruralhome.org. Again, thank you for joining us for today's webinar, Why Creative Placemaking on the Ground Impacts. I'd like to quickly turn the webinar over to our moderator today, who is joining us from BC Workshops, Lizzie McWillie. She is an Associate Director there at BC Workshops. Lizzie? One moment, please. We're having a little bit of a technical difficulty. Lizzie?
Hello?
Yes. Hi, thank you. Sorry about
that. Oh, sure. Great, thank you. Let's see. Oh, can we switch? Oh, thank you. Perfect. Great. Okay. Um, so as Carrie mentioned, my name is Lizzie McWillie. I'm the Associate Director of the Dallas Office of Building Community Workshop. As some of you may know, this webinar is part of something called the Rural Placemaking Program, a collaboration between Building Community Workshop and the Housing Assistance Council, funded by an NEA Our Town Knowledge Building grant. The purpose of rural placemaking is to build understanding and practice of creative placemaking in rural communities. Both HAC and BC seek to promote creative placemaking as an important tool in comprehensive community development and build knowledge of the practice within HAC's member network. This program includes a series of technical trainings and resources for HAC's member network, as well as funding opportunities for 2 creative placemaking pilot projects in rural regions. Those projects are currently underway. And just a little bit about Building Community Workshop. We are a nonprofit community design center with offices here in Dallas, Houston, Brownsville, and Washington, D.C. Our focus is, it ranges from affordable housing design to creative placemaking to neighborhood planning. And we're really excited about this work that we've been doing with HAC and for the projects that we're about to get started on. So for a brief overview of what we're going to be discussing today, we've invited 4 speakers to individually share their working definitions for creative placemaking that they use on the ground every day, to share brief stories of their creative placemaking experiences across the nation and the valuable outcomes for rural communities where they work. Following their presentation, we will open up for a group discussion on the role of arts in community development and housing and integrating creative placemaking into existing community and housing development work. Now I'll introduce our speakers. First, we have Vernita Dorr, former Deputy Undersecretary for the U.S. Rural Development. Vernita has built a wealth of experience within the USDA with 30 years of leadership and support for rural communities across the United States. Formerly the South Carolina State Director for Rural Development, Dorr was appointed Deputy Undersecretary of Rural Development in Washington, D.C., overseeing operations and management for the state of the Chief Financial Officer and the Office of Civil Rights and State Directors with an annual operating budget of $685 million. $38 billion annual program, and a $212 billion loan portfolio. A native of Beaufort, South Carolina, Dorr earned a Bachelor of Arts in Journalism from the University of South Carolina. She has received additional professional development from Harvard's John F. Kennedy School of Government, the University of South Carolina's Darla Moore School of Business, the Federal Executive Institute, and the USDA Graduate School. She is a graduate of the Diversity Leaders Institute at Furman University. Next, we have Susan Duplessis, Program Director of the South Carolina Arts Commission. Susan has spent most of her life in her native South Carolina, and it is this place that defines her. With her family's long history in the state dating back to the early 1700s, she has a deep sense of connection to the people, history, and geography of the state. As Program Director of the South Carolina Arts Commission, she engages with people who call themselves artists and those who don't. Her work also includes partnering with community organizations, educators, grassroots community leaders, and culture bearers across the state. She continues to learn about the places and people that make living in South Carolina unexpected and rewarding. Working within the realm of community engagement and development, she is currently proud to co-direct the Coastal Gula Geechee Cultural Heritage Corridor Partnership Program for the State Arts Agency, as well as to have developed and now lead its creative placemaking initiative in South Carolina's rural 6-county promise zone called the Art of Community Rural South Carolina. Next, we have Bill Menner, founder of the Bill Menner Group. Bill is the founder of the Bill Menner Group, a consulting firm focused on community development, rural partnerships, and economic vitality. Previous to the creation of that small business, Menner served the Obama administration as Iowa's State Director of USDA Rural Development. In that position, he oversaw an organization that provides housing, community facility, energy, and business support across rural Iowa. Between 2009 and 2017, rural development invested more than $5 billion in loans and grants in rural communities and businesses in Iowa. Prior to his White House appointment to USDA, Menner served as Executive Director of Poweshiek Iowa Development, a community-wide economic development organization based in Grinnell. In addition to acting as the County Economic Development Director, he led downtown development, historic preservation, and tourism efforts in the city of Grinnell. Menner also served 14 years as a public radio reporter, 7 covering government and politics, including the 1992 and 1996 Iowa caucuses. He is the author of 2 books about Grinnell, one of which tells the story of the Merchants National Bank, a national historic landmark designed by the legendary architect Louis Sullivan. A native of the Cleveland, Ohio area, Menner is a graduate of Ohio State University with a BA in journalism and an MA in political science. He has 4 children who range in the age from 21 to 26. And then finally, we have Joseph Kunkel, Executive Director of the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative. Joseph is a Northern Cheyenne tribal member. He is a community designer and educator working on building capacity in Indian country. As an Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow, Joseph worked directly with the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative and the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Authority. His most recent work with SNCC has been to research and share exemplary Native American Indian housing projects and processes nationwide and build and develop emerging best practices, which has led to the development of an online health homes roadmap for affordable housing development in Indian country, all funded by HUD's Policy Development and Research Office. His professional career has centered on community-based design, ranging from material research and fabrication to community-based planning, design, and development. At the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Authority, Joseph assisted with the planning and development of a 41-unit low-income housing tax credit development, along with leading the housing comprehensive master plan, which started with an Our Town grant funded by the NEA and has led to an Art Place America Grant Award. This award will fund multiple arts projects, tying together 2 new affordable housing developments in the Santo Domingo Pueblo. Great. So as you can see, we have really great speakers. I want to be able to provide them all with time to speak about their experiences. So I have 2 questions or 2 prompts that I would like everybody to spend about 10 minutes answering. To briefly share about how each of you talk about creative placemaking in the context of your work, and share some examples of when you saw direct community development outcomes from this creative placemaking work. And these examples can range from a hyper-local to a large or regional scale. So let's start with Bernita and Susan.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I am pleased to be here. And I've witnessed creative placemaking, not only in work, but I've visited every county in the state of South Carolina and almost every state in the nation, meeting people and listening to them and listening to their challenges and becoming familiar with their challenges, the challenges that they face. And being on the ground and doing what I call is my life's work makes creative placement very valuable to me. I saw people of various communities come together and to find ways to improve their communities by including all voices, and that's extremely important, incorporating cultural experiences to create a vision for their communities. And just the elements of this coming together has proven to be huge. I've found that we were able to do wonderful work in these communities to include libraries and schools and art centers and museums, even commercial kitchens, things that would bring people together of various walks of life to come together for a common purpose and to build and grow their communities. Susan?
Hi, Vernita, and hi, everyone on the call. This is Susan Duplessis with the South Carolina Arts Commission, and I just want to first thank Vernita for her leadership through the years as the director of USDA Rural here in South Carolina, and then for her leadership as Deputy Undersecretary for the last few years. So many thanks, Vernita, and thanks for that overview. I'm here at a state arts agency, and for those of you listening in, every state has a state arts agency in our country, and ours, like many of those out there, is celebrating its 50th year this year. And so like many state arts agencies, we're all looking to create relevance for the work that we do for arts and culture in our places where we are. And here at the State Arts Commission in South Carolina, just as a little background, we have 3 priority areas that we work in, and those are artist development, arts and education, and community development. So what we're talking about today actually touches all 3 of those areas, but in particular, community development is where we've really centered our approach to creative placemaking. And so I wanted to tell you a little bit. Lizzie has asked us to define creative placemaking in our terms. And so for the South Carolina Arts Commission, this is an approach to how we work in community and how we connect in relevant and strategic ways. And so what is it? It's about the ground that we stand on and the ground that we share. It's those places that we find between us that resonate with all of us as we're members of one home community. And so that's sort of the grounding of this. And then we've also asked, as we've worked, as Lizzie mentioned, in a rural promise zone in our state, we've asked, what is it about this place that we celebrate? Let's talk about what we have. Let's not focus so much on what we don't have. Let's use that as a launching pad for conversation. I'm going to talk to you a little bit briefly about a new framework that we've created called the Art of Community Rural SC, and really pleased to have had Vernita, Doors, and USDA's support for this project, which has unfolded over the last year and a half. But as we work in a rural place, we've asked our participants what makes it home? Why do you live where you live? And what are our connections? What creates a sense of belonging? So that's kind of the context for this. At the same time, we all know that we have challenges in communities and cities and towns and neighborhoods and crossroads, rural and not rural, across our country. And those issues are related to growth and change and engagement and many other community development challenges like housing and health and economic development. And then we also have issues that are related to what divides us, including race and income and education. So we go into this work knowing all of this. So in the vein of creative placemaking, we ask, how can arts and culture be used strategically to shed light on an issue, to unite us in a common purpose, and create new understanding and new relationships and new strategies that address these challenges. So in short, for us, we define creative placemaking as a strategic use of arts and culture to find common ground, to celebrate the places where we live, and to tackle one or more of our tough challenges. Vernita has been with us through this process, and she knows about the framework that we created, the Art of Community Rural SC, which in a nutshell was the Arts Commission's kind of turning around and looking at how we were connecting and working in a rural region that we didn't have a lot of foothold in. And so instead of coming in really through a arts and culture place, we came in through a community development place. So it's really a different way of working for the Arts Commission. And at the end of this seminar, we're going to share our booklet that will give anyone interested more information about how this framework was built. And basically it has three major components. We work with what we call the Mavens, one from each of the 6 counties where we're very strategically working in our Rural Promise Zone. We asked each of them to build teams of community members who were inclined to do community work but not necessarily already at the table. And then we built a national cohort of advisors to help inform and advise us on this partnership, also so that what we were doing here in South Carolina could be known better and we would connect better outside of our state. We formed a partnership with the Promise Zone designation and the entity that went for that designation, which is an economic development agency in our state. We participated in all the strategic planning that happened around the development of the Promise Zone, so we are very familiar with who showed up for those strategic planning sessions. We're familiar with how it feels to be in a place where we talk so much about what we don't have that we forget what we do have. The Arts Commission has, through this new framework and project, we've created time and space for our Mavens and our team members and other advisors to come together and to begin to talk about how we tell the story of community and how we tell our own stories and what we understand about the places from where we come. And so we're not forgetting that there's a context to what we're talking about, and that when we do tell our stories, we need to tell them in a compelling way and also connect to those issues that make our story urgent. So we built, working with our local teams, they built 6 local projects to actually practice this thing called creative placemaking. So looking at a local challenge, asking what was an arts and culture intervention. And we've seen a couple of really great examples of local groups who are grassroots, local citizens coming together as teams to tackle blight in their community and to turn a lot that was full of rubble into an art park. We've looked at another group that created an art park, and they're tackling literacy in their county, where the literacy rate, they have 27% of their population cannot read. So they're tackling that as an issue. And then another community that had a very disengaged business community. We know how important local business is. How can we support local business in a very rural place? So that one of our groups has created a new effort to engage the business community, to bring them together to talk about how they support the local community and how the local community can support them. This is really different work for a state arts agency to be doing, and we're really proud of it. Some of the valuable outcomes in just the first year of this work, and we're just now in the 2nd year, is that we feel like we've changed or we've emphasized the relevance of arts and culture in place in South Carolina. We've changed the relevance, frankly, of the state arts agency in some of these places, working so closely with our local citizens. And we've also seen the power of local citizens in place to own their own communities, their assets and challenges, and to equip them with the tools they need to tell their own stories and to connect the resources beyond our state and within our state. So I'll leave it there. I think I've taken the 10 minutes now. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Susan. I see a comment in the comment box about being able to see everyone. Susan and Vernita are joining by phone, so their cameras are not connected, but we do have myself, Terry, Joseph, and Bill now visible via our webcams. So next we have Bill. Just to restate the question, can you briefly share how creative placemaking fits into your work and how you talk about creative placemaking, and share an example of how you've seen a direct community development outcome from your work. Thanks, Bill.
Bill,
Oh, wait, hold on.
yeah, right. It looks like you don't have audio, Bill.
You're still silent. No.
One moment. See if you're able to.
Okay, I should be on now.
Yep,
Bar.
we can hear you.
All right, well, here's a story about life in rural America and rural Iowa. My signal kept dropping out in my internet. So I didn't trust the internet company, so I decided to call in at the same time. And that way, if my beautiful face were to disappear, I'd still be on by phone, but clearly the system outwitted me. But I do live in a rural community and live in a town of 9,300, as the introduction stated, and have had the chance really to work with rural communities for the better part of my career, whether I was a reporter covering rural issues or working in public policy or working as a downtown developer in a small town. These are things that were embedded in really in my career to date. And I think when I think about placemaking in general, it's a dedicated effort to highlight the authenticity of some place, whether it's a neighborhood, a community, a county, a region, even a state, or a multi-state region. There's something authentic about that place. Then you get into creative placemaking, which in my mind starts to dip into the what I'll call dot connecting component, where you're bringing partners together aimed at that sort of fuzzy placemaking concept, but you're also starting to engage arts and culture and history, and so it requires more partners. And when I like to tell folks I'm a glorified dot connector, because it's all about bringing partners to the table and reaching out and finding either individuals or groups that aren't necessarily included all the time. So there's an element of diversity to that creative placemaking. And then what I've really focused on rural arts-based creative placemaking, which sorts of narrows it down even more. But it's all about helping these rural places which have these remarkable histories of their place, of their people, of their cultures, and embedding within them opportunities for artists, for people who enjoy arts and culture, whether they're residents or tourists or others, to come and enjoy that place and take something from it and leave something behind. So I've had a few opportunities over my career, as I mentioned. In the last 2 years, I was fortunate to be the co-chair of a state working group on what's called Next Gen. That's a partnership of the Rural Policy Research Institute, or RUPRI, and Art of the Rural. Iowa was one of 3 pilot states, along with Minnesota and Kentucky. And I understand South Carolina has signed the papers and is going to join the group as well. But that was a statewide effort to bring together a working group to identify opportunities to enhance rural arts-based placemaking. How do you make small towns vibrant places? How do you recruit young people? How do you recruit artists? How do you keep them there? How do you create opportunities for folks who live and work in those towns to have something to do after they go home at night? These were things that this working group were focused on. We came together about a year ago this month and started coming up with some priorities. And not surprisingly, going back to that dot connector concept, one of the things that these people from across Iowa, from towns of as small as 200 people, the one thing they wanted was a connection to other people doing the same thing. We had a conversation between a young woman in southeast Iowa who was running an art gallery in her rural community, but was struggling for exhibitions. and she happened to be sitting at the same table with a gentleman who ran an art gallery in Southwest Iowa, 3 hours away, who had exhibitions, and the two of them figured out a way to collaborate and share what they had. It never would have happened if they hadn't had that conversation. But it also evolved into the point of everyone in these small towns who were working on this very topic felt like they were doing it in a vacuum, that they were doing it alone and they had no support whatsoever. And one of our goals is to try to create some sort of a network for individuals, not just to support their work, but to give them really strong case studies, templates for future activities from which they can learn. Here's a great story. The town of Corning, Iowa, which is in southwest Iowa, population 1,300, best known as the birthplace of Johnny Carson. In fact, Johnny Carson's home where he was born has been preserved, and it's a tiny museum. He grew up in Nebraska, but was born in Corning, and Corning is this fascinating little town. It's the county seat in Adams County, Iowa, and Adams County happens to be the smallest county in the state. So here's Corning, the county seat with about 1,300 people. And a few years ago, they found out that their downtown hardware store was going out of business. And they had retail space at the street level, and they had 2 apartments upstairs. So they wanted to do something impactful with that old hardware store retail space. What they did was they turned the downstairs into a combination gallery and studio. And then they fixed up the 2 apartments, and then they recruited artists. They created a residency program and started bringing in artists, sometimes early career, sometimes mid-career, sometimes they're well-established, and invited them to come to Corning and live upstairs, work downstairs in the studio. But part of that work in their studio where they're doing their own creative work also included opening up the gallery, answering questions, selling merchandise, including their own artwork, doing classes and lectures, and being part of the community. It was a fascinating opportunity for these folks, many of whom were not from Iowa originally, but there they are living in downtown Corning, walking down the steps to work, having a great space to expand their own portfolio of work, and interacting with these great people. So that was a big step, but the folks in Corning weren't done. They had a 1880s era opera house around the corner that was in not great shape. They raised $2 million locally to take that opera house and restore it and create one of the great opera houses in Iowa. And so they have a vibrant arts community. They've got this residency program. They've got the opera house. And what that has done is it's prompted other property owners downtown to fix up their facades. New businesses are coming. New restaurants have emerged. And all of this is based on a focus on arts and culture in a community where you say to yourself, Southwest Iowa, lots of corn, lots of cattle. Where does that come from? Well, the roots of Corning are in an Icarian community from the 1800s who founded that community outside of Corning and lived there for decades. And in fact, their history is preserved by their descendants as well. So from Johnny Carson to Icarians to an opera house to an artist residency program, I can't think of a better place than Corning, Iowa, to tell the story of what really is possible when you think about rural arts-based placemaking. So again, I'm glad to be on. I'm happy to share the stage with my friend Vernita Dorr, who's a great public servant, and appreciate the chance to visit today.
Thanks, Bill. Finally, we have Joseph. Do you need me to repeat the questions, or you got it?
I think I'm good.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Hi, all. Again, Joseph Kunkel here with the Sustainable Native Communities Collaborative. We're, again, a design firm or a nonprofit design firm working on building capacity in Indian country. And I think to kind of think about creative placemaking, or how we've kind of framed it, indigenous placemaking or placekeeping, has been a space that we found a lot of success in, aligning with the arts, aligning with culture, aligning with place. We like to say that specifically the communities that we worked in, we found that around 65 to 75% of the population relies on doing or making as a core center of providing means for food on the table, or providing an everyday life. And so we as architects, planners, developers try and find ways to infuse or use that as a cornerstone for development. And we find that to be kind of essential in how we engage in community and try and find ways of working. Specifically, so when I was Enterprise Rose Architectural Fellow, this all started with an NEA Our Town grant to kind of lay the groundwork of how we understood the community, and through a community engagement or community development process. We basically found ourselves working on the ground, working with artists, working with tribal leadership to better understand how the community found themselves in that space. It was interesting, the initial community meetings we did have, and understanding this kind of internally from my own perspective, I'd ask the questions, well, how many of you all consider yourself artists? And in this large community meeting, nobody would raise their hand. And then I'd step back and I'd reframe the question, well, how many of you make things? How many of you are jewelers? How many of you are pottery makers? How many of you make food every day to provide an income for your family? And 75, 80%, a majority of the room raised their hand. And so we started to reframe the question, well, consider yourselves artists, doers. And their response was, well, I didn't have a formal arts or fine arts education, so they didn't really consider themselves artists. And so we tried to reframe that question and understand, and have the community understand, well, how can we provide opportunities for you? And in doing so, we aligned it, and I specifically was put on the ground at Santo Domingo to look at affordable housing. How can we provide more affordable housing to the larger community at large? And this all started with this, the Our Town grant that we had, that we received. And in doing so, we started to better understand, well, how can affordable housing kind of align with the artist's kind of larger purpose? And this kind of all started to result around healthy housing, indoor air quality, providing studio space for the artist. Historically, they were never asked those questions. How can we provide, as designers, planners, developers, that type of infrastructure for that population? And a specific example is, well, during that community design process, what are some things that you can use in your housing space? And it so often was like, well, I make pottery, or I grind shells, or these are cultural pieces that I do in my home. Well, as an architect, as a planner, we started to realize, well, having that studio space in the home wasn't necessarily healthy to the indoor air quality. And so we took that in our planned development, took that artist studio, knowing it's important outside of the housing unit, and provide a space for all the artists kind of that was really kind of outside that space. So fast forwarding to some of the final project that we did, we leveraged an Indian Community Development Block Grant, Indian Housing Block Grant, with a low-income housing tax credit to better understand how we can provide housing for artists, and mainly for the larger population. So all 41 units were developed with an artist studio, or a shed, as we kind of framed it. And then kind of backing up a second, trying to understand how that housing development would then be connected to larger infrastructure in a rural setting, right? So the Santo Domingo Pueblo is located about 20 minutes south of Santa Fe, about 45 minutes north of Albuquerque, in a rural setting. And we framed the housing development as a rural transit-oriented development, knowing that affordable housing, artist housing needed to be connected to public infrastructure, to public transit. And in doing so, we started to find other opportunities like Our Place America, and we were fortunate enough to get an Art Place America grant to connect the housing development back to the historic Pueblo. And so this idea of connection and trying to find connection and how connection happened within the community was crucial. And so I kind of back on to that idea that indigenous placemaking and a creative kind of place keeping was really important for that specific community. As we kind of zoom out to the larger context of Indian country, we understand that culture and the arts are quintessential to how we develop community. And it might not necessarily be artist housing, but it's how do we provide infrastructure for that creative economy. And we as developers and designers have that opportunity to really kind of understand the lay of the land and work with the community to better understand what are those opportunities. Is it housing? Is it public infrastructure? Is it an arts incubator? Are they skill sets? Is it health services? And so as we see it, I mean, this is a small component of a larger community development process in Indian country, which really, I mean, for us, gets us really excited trying to leverage this kind of method or this process within the larger context of Indian country. So.
Great, thank you. So we are running a little bit behind. So I want to make sure that everybody in the audience has a chance to ask their questions that they would like to ask. So I'm just going to select one of the questions from the list that I've been planning on asking. And I think everyone covered this to some degree, but one of the questions that we get asked most frequently, so I just want to be explicit about the information that maybe you guys could share with everybody, is about how work is funded. I know there were a number of different grants mentioned and some federal funding, but maybe if y'all could just share again how you do the work that you do in terms of funding. Is there also some combination of fee-for-service work that contributes to you being able to do creative placemaking? Are there initial grants maybe that have gotten you started that have enabled you to get onto bigger projects, or then for folks that maybe are on the funding side of things, what are some of the funding mechanisms or options out there that you know of that provide funding to rural creative placemaking work? And maybe we could start with Bernita and Susan, and then which kind of go in the same order. Bernita, Susan, then Phil, and then Joseph, and then we'll follow up with the webinar audience Q&A.
All right. Thank you, Lizzie. Rural development has a number of funding opportunities for groups and communities that seek to have creative placement in their communities. We have grants through our business and industry program. One was formerly the Rural Development Business and Enterprise Grant, which is now the Rural Development Community Grant. And that's one that is very active at this time, that we would invite people from across the country to apply for. There are also some community facility grants that would be available for this type work. And with regard to housing, we have, can you hear me okay? With regard to housing, we have direct loans, which comes with no grant, but these loans are subsidized. And we also have loans through our rural business programs for contractors or developers to develop communities that can incorporate creative placemaking. So we have an arsenal of tools that people can use at my former employer, USDA Rural Development. Susan?
Yes, thank you, Vernita. And I would just say that if you imagine the bubble of the initiative that I described called the Art of Community Rural SC, As an initiative of the State Arts Commission, what we did is we, in relationship with USDA Rural Development, initially had a cooperative agreement to seed some of this initial work, which was about, starting on the ground level and building up and really engaging with citizens on the ground so that it wasn't the Arts Commission sort of putting something down onto a community, but watering what was there so it could grow. So we had that initial funding that came in that way, with the goal always being that we would then we would develop our own legs to go after a USDA grant that would help support, again, this continuation of work, with the idea that that funding would then flow down and into the community. So it's really about flow and allowing that funding to get into the community that needs the funding. And so that's what we've been working on. And as I mentioned earlier, the funding that went into the communities to support their local projects was a direct result of that USDA cooperative agreement funding. We are awaiting any day word that we've applied for a rural business development grant that will continue this work on the ground and work in a way with the creative entrepreneurs within this region of our state. And we are keeping our fingers crossed that that funding will come through and support it in a direct way that way. We also working closely with our USDA representatives in the state and are getting all of the updates about the variety of federal grants that are available, and in particular the community facilities grant that Vernita mentioned. One of our goals is that we work with the people on the ground so that they are getting grants, and what we understood in our entry into this work is that the capacity for going after some of these big federal grants was not necessarily there. And so we're learning as we go, and the goal is that we will then stand with and beside those of our constituents who are up for the task. So we are also looking at, national or foundations outside of our state that are really interested in working in rural. And as we're just a year into this, trying to look at what are those connections that we can make as we go that will create, the opening for a conversation and a relationship to go. So I'm sorry, it's a little bit of a general answer, but that's where we are with this work and how we're thinking about building resources, always connecting to what's compelling about your place and what's urgent, and how can we look at those people who connect and care about what's urgent, and so that's what we're doing.
Thanks, Vernita and Susan. Bill? Oh, can't hear you.
Well,
Hello? Okay.
when I got to USDA in 2009, there was a fair amount of grant money available, and that amount of grant money went down dramatically every year. Congress views rural development as an infrastructure bank, as a $1 trillion portfolio, so that makes sense. If you look at the state of Iowa, the amount of grant money they have for their arts programs, arts grants programs, is dropping dramatically. So if the federal government granting authority and state government granting authority is disappearing, and I've told rural communities this for years, you got to do it yourselves. You got to work with your community foundation. You got to tap into that transfer of wealth that's going on, and you got to figure out a way to get folks whose kids have all left to treat their community and their community foundation as one of their kids, and set aside some percentage of their estate for that community foundation. In Iowa, the transfer of wealth is in the trillions of dollars, and if you could capture a 1/10 of 1% of $1 trillion, you wouldn't need any grant programs from the government. You could do it yourself. So grants are so hard. I mean, you all know this. Especially hard to get grants for operations and programming. My recommendation would be help empower your community foundation give them the strength to go raise money so you don't have to look to the state or the feds to do it for you.
Great, thanks, Bill. Joseph?
Yeah, I think exactly. I mean, building off of what Bill said. I mean, in Indian country, we look at this kind of creative placemaking or indigenous placemaking as economic development, and we look at it as a sovereignty issue and ways of developing less dependency on the federal government. If we can take, and so kind of looking at the question, we look at grants or the Indian Housing Block Grant mainly because there's a guaranteed Indian Housing Block Grant coming from HUD as a seeding grant, or look at Our Place or these larger foundations as seeding grants, and look at housing as economic development, ways of building equity within our community. If we're able to do that, then we're becoming less dependent and we're kind of relying on our own communities to invest in themselves, right? To take on debt, to kind of take on mortgages and build that economy within the community. So for instance, the Santo Domingo Tribal Housing Project, 41 unit housing development, was a source of almost like 8 to 10 different funding sources. And so tribes need to be really creative in how they fund these projects and build their own capacity in leveraging and finding ways of developing their own economy within their own communities. And I mean, the soapbox is tribes are not sovereign in a sense that they should be, right? And again, going back to this idea of building their own economy around housing, around the creative economy, and trying to find ways to leverage better and to take on more conventional ways of financing.
Great, thanks everyone. So we're at Q&A. If people have questions, I think they can type it into the Q&A box. We don't have a lot of time. We'll try to get to as many questions as possible. We have one right now from Stephen Sugg from the Housing Assistance Council. And he was wondering if you guys have any specific tips for working with rural schools on creative placemaking. I don't know if anyone has already had some experience working with schools or kind of suggestions of how that collaboration might work. I'll leave that open. I don't know if there's anyone in particular that's most suited to answer that.
Yeah, I mean, right now, so we're right now in the midst of the Santa Fe Art Institute's design workshop, where we're working with high school aged and early college career students to kind of build their capacity around why design is important, why a design education and design thinking should be afforded to those populations in rural communities, right? We're not just focused on Indian country here in this aspect, but we're trying to understand why and how we can get that design education into youth so that then they can go back into their own community and develop that capacity locally. The Santa Fe Art Institute's design workshop is actually funded through another NEA grant. And so it's how do we educate natives and non-natives to work in these rural spaces. And I think we should be doing more of that with the knowledge that we have at hand.
And
I think that engaging schools altogether is just, it's sort of they're easily left out. And yet when rural communities sit down and do visioning for their collective futures, they rarely ask the young people in the community for their 2 cents worth. So you wonder why the young people leave for other places. It's because no one asked them what they think. And so reaching out to the schools, not just the school leadership, the administrators and the teachers, but the students as well, has to be part of that. And really, they're sort of those, when you do an all of the above invitation to try and reach out to partners who aren't always included, they have to be on that list.
And I'll share an example from South Carolina, and one of the projects is happening through our Art of Community initiative in one of the 6 rural communities. Their local project was to actually create a mural on a wall in the small downtown space, and this is a community of about 2,000 people. About 800 of the people who live in that community are actually students, somewhere between kindergarten and high school. And so the sense was with our local maven, who is the head of the community development organization for that area, was that the kids don't really connect with their local history or understand it or know it. There's a sense of disconnection. And in the same way that we've asked our community members who are coming together to talk about home and what makes them feel like they belong and why do they care about the places that they live, there was the sense that the same thing really needed to happen with the kids. So in this project that they're doing downtown, they're looking at how to then connect with the school, with the local high school, and bring students in to help inform. You know, they're going to be looking back at the history of the train in that community and also the history of agriculture. This was once known as world capital of cucumber production and asparagus. And so they want to then use this design project that they're doing downtown to engage students and to help understand what are those, what is the history and what do the students know and how can they involve them in this project so that they have a relationship. Because I think that's the other piece that's missing is the relationship. It kind of breaks down when you start, talking about it in real terms. How do you connect? So do you know the principal? Do you know the social studies teacher? Do you know the art teacher? And it's often, as small as these communities are, often the teachers who are teaching in the rural schools aren't from those communities. So trying to work on several different levels to create a connection to the sense of place, to the place, and create that sense of place that feels missing right now. So that's one example of how we're working with creative placemaking and schools.
Great, thank you. So we only have 3 minutes left. I'm sorry, Evelyn, we didn't get to your question. Maybe you could follow up with Joseph, just if Evelyn had a question for you specifically about working with Native communities. But I just wanted to take the last 3 minutes to thank everybody for participating in this call. I think there's a lot of information on everybody's, well, a lot of folks who are here have websites where you might be able to check out more information about some of the projects that they mentioned. The project that BC and HAC is working on, we're currently working with 2 organizations. There will be a number of updates about those projects posted on each of our websites over the course of the next couple of months. So if you're interested in learning more about some of the methods that we're using on the ground, creative placemaking, we'd love for you to look at our website, bcworkshop.org. We'll be posting information about each project as they happen. Terry, is there any concluding remarks that you want to make?
There are really no concluding remarks, but there was one question that I was hoping that we could have answered that came in right before we switched the rooms. And the question was, and I guess this can be thrown to anyone, who are the natural partners for creative placemaking, more specifically to Joseph and Bill as you discuss the rural placemaking?
Natural partners? Well, I mean, in my mind, it's the people of the community. It's the economic developer, as Joseph mentioned. It's got to be the elected officials, the students. I mean, when we talk about an all of the above strategy, that's what it means, all of the above. But this is as much a business approach and a business function as it is an arts function, because our workforce of the future depends on it, and the livelihood of our rural places depend on it. So I would just cast a really wide net.
Perfect.
And then go find the people that didn't get caught up in the net and find out what they think.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you guys so much. Just want to quickly remind everyone before we wrap up that this recording, as well as the presentation or the slides from BC Workshop, will be available on HAC's website following the call. Also, please be on the lookout for an email that contains your certificate of participation, as well as a link to the webinar survey. This tells us if we're doing a really good job of meeting the needs of bringing the appropriate or most relevant information to you as far as your organization's activities. Again, before we go, I'd like to thank Vernita, Susan, Bill, and Joseph for providing their expertise, as well as the wealth of information that they shared during today's webinar. And I'd like to also thank each of you for joining us today. Please enjoy the rest of your afternoon. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Take care now. Y'all. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye, everyone.
See you.